Welcome back, everybody. So I recently got the opportunity to do something I've wanted to do for a long time, which is watch 2001: A Space Odyssey in theaters. And so I just wanted to share the experience with you here today, tell you what impressions it made on me. Not only was it my first time seeing the movie in the theaters, it was my first time seeing it maybe in close to 20 years. I would consider this one of my favorite movies, but it's not an easy one to sit down and watch. It famously feels a little bit long. And also you need to just totally sit and absorb it. I would never watch this anywhere where there's any daylight. As much as you can darken your room and just sit down and zone out to it, the better. You just have to let yourself fully feel it or you're not getting the experience. That was partly why I was excited to watch it in a theater, and I'll tell you about my impressions of that here in a minute. First, for those who aren't familiar with it, 2001: A Space Odyssey is this highly episodic story about humans seeming to encounter aliens that guide their progress. And so I say seemingly because we never see the aliens. The only thing we see as kind of a manifestation of their existence is these big black flat blocks called monoliths. And it seems like whenever humans or before that apes encounter one, it helps lead their progress, either using tools or going out into space and stuff like that. This was a really wise choice, number one, because showing aliens is always going to get a little hokey. Also, the fact of the matter is, just for the sake of realism, and I think one thing that makes this movie kind of philosophically deep, is it shows what it might actually look like if we encountered something alien out in space. It would be so far different from us that we would probably barely know it if we saw it. And the communication barrier would be such that we couldn't just sit there and make hand motions at each other, use a universal translator. Whatever life there was would have to just give us impressions kind of like it does in this movie. And so I know that's one thing that really helps this movie is that you never see the aliens. It would be a weird, chintzy, totally different movie if they did. So what are the episodes in this movie? Let me just run through them with you real quick in case you haven't seen this or just could use a reminder. First, it opens at, I think, the dawn of man is what they might call it. But basically, a band of apes out in the middle of the plain or savannas or whatever is trying to survive. We see them trying to gather enough food and just basically scrape by in existence. They find a water hole or are just at a water hole, which is kind of vital for them to continue living, when other apes come and drive them away. And then soon after that, they're all huddled kind of pathetically, encounter a monolith, and immediately after that, discover how to use bones as weapons and go drive the other apes away. Biggest flash forward in the history of movies. After that, we see a spaceship traveling. And this brings us to what I would call the two Dr. Haywood Floyd sequences. He's a scientist going up into space, and his job is to, he's basically running a cover story because they found another monolith on the moon. And so he has to maintain this cover story to keep everybody from panicking or give the government time to let humans absorb the idea that aliens exist. Because of all that, he has to keep up a cover story that there's a outbreak of a disease out there. And so that's why they have to shut down communication with a base. There's two sequences, one in which he goes to a space station and talks to other scientists. Literally, it's just him talking to them about the cover story. And then later he flies up to the moon base. He gives a speech, a really dry, boring speech kind of, to a group of people who work there, telling them that they need to maintain the story. Basically, they can't even be in contact with their families or anything, and they can't leave. And then they show the monolith. The monolith makes this really high-pitched noise, and it looks like it's just devastating their ears. And it's shooting a radio signal out to Jupiter. The last two sequences are the trip to Jupiter. So the fourth one is the famous one where the astronauts are flying out to Jupiter and their computer tries to take over the ship. This is the HAL 9000 character. I think this is the most famous thing from the movie. It basically tries to kill the crew, and then they have to use their resourcefulness to survive. It kills everybody except Dave Bowman, who survives and actually gets to Jupiter. And then is the trip through the Stargate, which is a sequence of, I think at least 5 minutes of just flashing lights and colorized reverse photography and stuff like that to give the impression that he's going through a gate to some other world. It's very, very abstract. And in the end, you see him in this really weird, stark white room with fancy beds and tables and stuff like that, and suddenly see himself as an older person. And it looks like he grows up in this place, and it might be a zoo that aliens are watching him in or something like that. And then last thing you see is a fetus floating through space, which I think is supposed to be him, and they call it the Star Child. Really weird, abstract ending. But that's more or less what the movie's about. And essentially, through each step, whether it's giving apes the knowledge to use tools, however it conveyed that information, or up on the moon when they unearthed it, it gave them knowledge that aliens existed, and the radio signal got them to go up to Jupiter. And then at Jupiter, the gate took them off to wherever it took Dave, and he had whatever encounter he did with aliens. So my overall impressions, this was everything I thought it would be watching it on the big screen. Again, you are just watching a lot of very methodical atmospheric sequences, whether out on the plains with the apes. The spaceship sequences also are great on the big screen. The best thing by far, I think, was the Stargate sequence, which is famously just abstract and feels like a little bit of a chore to sit through. It's kind of cool because it gives the effect of him flying off to somewhere else and freaking out or whatever. But you kind of, on TV, at least for me anyway, I experienced it more. It conveyed more the knowledge that that's happening. When you're in the theater, I had to go to the bathroom pretty bad, to be honest. And when we got to that point, I was going to get up. But as soon as you see it in the theater, it just blows you away. Like you actually feel it when you see it on the big screen. And so that was pretty awesome. The movie seems to show its age a little bit on the big screen. And my son and I, who went with me, we talked about this afterward. And it's hard to tell whether some of the photography looks a little grainy on some of the opening shots with the apes. It looks like they're trying to pass off still images as like photography of just a landscape, things like that. But I don't know if that's just the actual quality of the movie blown up onto the big screen, or if it's just the quality of the print they were using in the theater. He seems to think it was a second because he has some kind of Blu-ray that I don't know if they remastered it or something like that. But you could see the age a little bit. Didn't really affect the experience watching the movie. It was still amazing. It's weird not only seeing all this stuff just right before you on the big screen. We like to sit down near the front, or he does for the most part, and I humor him. This one was a perfect movie to do it in, though. And what was crazy is just the absolute silence, like feeling silence in the theater, which this movie does go just dead quiet for a while from time to time. It was weird, but it's almost like a transcendent experience watching this movie when you're in a theater. I don't know. One thing that grabbed me rewatching this, and I don't think this has as much to do with seeing it on the big screen as much as just seeing it again. Big screen might have contributed to my impressions. I'm not sure. Okay, so this movie is, I would almost call it a voyeuristic movie in that you're just totally watching it as if you're a cold outside observer. It doesn't communicate you much with many cues. In fact, I think they originally had a soundtrack written for it and they just tossed it out because they didn't want music suggesting things to you about how you should feel in any scene or aligning with a movie. And so to give that impression that you're just an outsider looking in, they just played classical music over it, which I think was the right choice. But because you're just kind of casually observing, it can't usually explain things to you using the language of cinema the way a lot of other movies do. They want you to just watch it and be able to pick up what's happening. And so to do this, I don't think I'd noticed this before. They really cleverly set up a lot of things. Like, for example, in the conflict between Hal and Dave, a lot depends on what angle Hal sees them from. There are a lot of point of view shots of Hal watching the other guys. And they established this early on when Dave shows a picture of his drawings and you can see it through Hal's camera and he tells him what a good job he's doing. Obviously, I think part of that is supposed to be like Hal infantilizing the humans, like an adult talking to a child, almost as if Hal's going to put that up on the bridge or something like that. But also, it looks a little bit chilling, and it just sets up for later in the movie when we're going to be seeing things from his perspective as he starts to fight the humans. And so a lot is communicated about those sequences ahead of time in ways that I don't even know if you realize until it pays off later. There's also when... sorry, I'm spacing on his name. Oh, when Dr. Floyd goes up to the space station, he's mainly talking to those scientists about the cover story of the outbreak for the monolith. But there's also this kind of bizarre scene where he calls his daughter on basically a TV phone. It'd be like FaceTiming someone today, but back then, that was this big science fiction thing that you could see a person on the phone while you're talking to them. He's up in the space station calling his daughter about the fact that it's her birthday and sorry he won't be there for it and things like that, but he's going to send her a present or something. It's an incredibly stilted conversation. And a lot of this movie, I don't want to get too much into the themes and how it's presented, but a lot of this movie is purposefully showing humans being kind of dry and deadpan. It affects a lot of the themes and the atmosphere and everything in the movie. I don't want to get too deep into that. But it feels kind of weird seeing this guy talk to his daughter in this emotionally detached way, and the conversation just feels a little dead. And also the whole thing just feels out of place. Like, why is it showing this guy having this extended conversation with his daughter before going and talking to scientists? But what I realize is later it sets up other sequences where Dave Bowman and Frank Poole are flying out to Jupiter and they have these little communications with other people, whether it's Frank's family calling him about his birthday and sending him a message. I think having set that up ahead of time lets the other things pass without explanation and then just gives it a little bit more punch because we have the context for it. So those kind of things I thought were interesting. And then, of course, there are the famous explosive bolts on the back of the little space pod that he goes out in. It shows these over and over and over again, and so you kind of know something's going to happen, and Dave uses it to escape into the ship later. Of course, this parallels the bathroom instructions. There's a scene for using a space toilet on a spaceship that has a list of instructions like this long, and it just shows Heywood Floyd looking at it, and I think that's supposed to be like a little bit of a joke. But one thing I thought was funny, and I think you maybe see this better on the big screen, or maybe I just noticed it more this time, how often this movie, as much as it doesn't really communicate to you as an audience, it makes you feel like you're just an outside observer. It shows you these little things to help explain what's happening in certain scenes. So for example, the flight attendant on one of the spaceship rides out to the moon, I think that's where they're going. But anyway, she's walking on the floor, kind of like walking very unsteadily. And then it goes to her feet and you can see that it has like grip soles or something like that. I can't remember the exact name. Or when Dave is going out to replace the little communications module that they wanted to test, he has to take out one piece, set it aside, and it little says like magnetic something or other on there. Same with the explosive bolts. They feel a little bit jarring because they are there to be direct explanations to the audience about how these things are working. And there's nothing bad about it, but it feels so different from the rest of the movie. Like it sticks out like a sore thumb. I find it almost cute in a way. I don't know. I just got a little chuckle when I saw them because the movie is so abstract and atmospheric. You are just taking it all in, and then all of a sudden they're like, hey, here's a little explanation for you. I don't know. I just thought that was a little fun. One thing I found when I watched this, now again, this is a movie that even if you like it, I think most people have to be honest and say it feels a little bit like a chore getting through it. It's rewarding in the end, but this doesn't give you a lot of really immediate gratification. But I did find it, I guess especially when you can settle in with that expectation, I found it more engaging than I thought I would. And so the ape sequence at the beginning, that feels almost like you're watching humans act out this basic nature documentary or something. And I always just thought it was kind of weird and kind of like work when I was younger. Watching it again this time, you get a lot more emotionally invested in those apes, I think, when you're kind of just paying more attention to it. There are in very dire circumstances. There is a lot of emotion to just the fact that they're trying to survive and what a struggle that is. And so I found myself getting more drawn in this time. Of course, the sequence where Dave is struggling against Hal after Hal kills Frank and all the other people on the trip, most of them are hibernating. That is actually a very tense, riveting, kind of hard science fiction action sequence. Yeah, that one is amazing. That one could stand by itself. That one, you aren't bored for a minute on that, unless, I don't know, maybe if you're just used to faster paced movies that spoon feed things to the audience. But if you have any inclination toward old style, kind of hard science fiction adventure things, that one was a great sequence. And even the end, again, the Stargate sequence probably was helped along by being in a theater. But in the end, when he's in the alien zoo or whatever that is, I feel like that moves along faster than I remembered. And it's just overall more engaging. The Dr. Floyd sequences, probably more draggy than a lot of the rest. I think that probably gives the movie its reputation for being slow. It's interesting that it is very formulaic, I think. When you're looking for it, there's a very obvious sequence of people talking, being on a ship and playing music while the ship flies, and then people talking again and the ship flying again. Nothing wrong with that. I think it works for what it's doing. And I think that the way it's all set up contributes to a lot of the movie's themes about humans learning to use tools, but then I think also growing in their humanity. Whole other story there. I don't want to dig into that. That sequence is, I think, important to the movie. I would never take it out, but I think it's definitely the least engaging. One thing I enjoyed is Dr. Floyd gives his speech to it's like a room of like 10 people just sitting in squares of tables, and he's sitting there telling them how they need to just, hang in there, keep up the cover story, don't talk to your families, don't leave, anything like that. And they're a little bit irritated, but they go along with it. It's the most dry, corporate sounding, boring thing ever. But then in the end later, as they're flying to another destination, someone tells him how great his speech was. I don't think that was just an accident. I think Kubrick had to be aware of how just dry and boring that was. And again, I think this contributes to the theme of all the characters just being kind of dry and deadpan and not really having a lot of personality. I think that had to have been in there, some kind of joke or comment. But anyway, I don't know what else to say. I just wanted to share some of my impressions watching the movie. I had a lot of fun with it. If you ever get the chance to watch it in a theater, I would just say do it. Even if you can't, if you haven't seen this movie before, if you have any inclination to like classic science fiction or classic movies and you have any tolerance for something that might feel a little slow, stream this or whatever they do now. I was going to say pop in a DVD, but nobody does that. Stream this, just take the time and do it in a totally dark room where you can just put your phones away and just totally absorb the movie. I think it'll be worth it. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Hope you enjoyed them. Have a good day, everybody.